Hello, this is Mike Van Meter. Welcome to the Recovery is Possible, Hope and Healing with Mike and Lily podcast. We want to thank you for joining us. You can reach us at our Facebook site, which is also called Recovery is Possible, or our website, which is vanmeterwellnesssolutions.com. This podcast exists to educate the public about addiction, remove the stigma associated with addiction, and offer help and support for those suffering from addiction. Hey everybody, this is Mike Van Meter, and this is Recovery is Possible, Hope and Healing with Mike and Lily. And Lily is not here today, so it's going to be me, joined by James Piacentino, who is the co-founder and CEO of Thrive Genetics. And I wanted to have James on the show today because he's really working with genetics, as you're going to find. You're going to find out all about what he and his company are doing and some of the research. And for those of you that listen to this podcast, you know that I'm always looking for new ways, new modalities, new methods to get people sober, and kind of mixing the old with the new. But I will tell you that working in the recovery field, that there's really nothing new under the sun. It's just we have better ways of doing things. And I'm really fascinated by the work that he and the folks that he works with are doing, because it's really sort of pushing the edge of some of the things that we already know about. And I know in the education groups I do with the patients I work with at the hospital, we're constantly talking about, the genetic predisposition that people have and how that sort of preloads you to being susceptible to addiction. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you know about it. And then really just understanding that and understanding the things that you can and you can't do or you shouldn't do. And that knowledge helps you get sober. And it really is something that I think that we need to focus on, because one of the things that I have noticed since I've come into this field, and just as a reminder, I spent my entire career in either the military or law enforcement. I did not work in this area my entire life. I was in law enforcement for the bulk of my career, and then got into recovery myself, and of course, became sober through the traditional 12-step methods, and of which I'm a big supporter of, and doing all the things that we typically do in recovery. However, when I went back to school and got this degree that enabled me to do the work that I'm doing right now, one of the things that stood out to me was how little effort and how little time rather was being spent on really finding better, more modern ways of helping people get sober. It's really just kind of rehashing the old, kind of rehashing all of the different modalities that have been used in the past. Many of them were great. Some of them, maybe not so much. But really, we did not spend a lot of time sitting around talking about, well, how can we improve these things? And so with James, what I'm really excited about is that he and the folks that he works with are working in that area and trying to push the edge of really helping as many people as we can. And so with that, James, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. And the introduction was superb. I'm excited to chat with you.
James, I'm really excited to have you on the show because this is very scientific, the work that you're doing here. And just tell us who you are. Tell us a bit about your company. How is it that you got into this type of work?
Sure. So the company Thrive Genetics I always like to say, was born out of two or maybe three really distinct opportunities. One was I was raised in an alcoholic family with addiction in several different places. Two, my co-founder is the head of Rutgers Addiction Research Center in New Jersey. She has science that's based on the genetics and the behaviors of addiction. And three is my 27 years in technology and tech that I have as a background. So what occurred, and I always say this isn't a company that started, say, 3 to 5 years ago. It was a company that started, 40 something years ago, because in 1982, my father was in this horrific car accident, and he had several spinal surgeries, back surgeries. And every time he'd go home, he'd be given a bottle of pills. And back then, there wasn't even Oxycontin, or it wasn't even invented probably, but there was some pretty strong pain medication. And essentially, when he'd go home with this, pill bottle, he would, augment it with wine, which is obviously not optimal. He created a real problem for himself. But I always like to say since it's a disease, I would say it's a systematic issue, where we're just giving prescriptions, even today, even with all the warnings and all the concerns, we're still giving prescriptions to patients that we have no idea if they are genetically or behaviorally predisposed to addiction at all, right? So in his case, go back to 1982, there was absolutely nothing, right? So when he would come back from the hospital, and he was in and out for years, I'm talking like from when I was in second grade until high school, he just developed a habit. It became an addiction. My grandfather, his father, was a gambling addict. So the company was one of these types of things where I always say it's a generational trauma that existed, right? This is something that I carry with me. Is it something that I'm passing down to my children, both genetically, behaviorally, or emotionally, in that family trauma that, whatever happened to me in my childhood that made me who I am today, is that something I'm passing along? So this is like a multi-billion-dollar problem. It's a multi-billion person problem, right? This is not just, a few people who are in recovery. My father was in this situation. I was not. I had not succumbed. I've not been exposed to. I've never been in recovery. But being a part of that family of four, if you will, I always say it's not just one person. It's the full family. So this opportunity had been presenting itself throughout my entire life. I've done a lot of charitable work, helped others in Los Angeles with different addiction recovery situations through a group. And it was one of these things where I just always thought, why can't we figure out where addiction comes from? It's not so much those in recovery, perhaps, but it's how do we get in front of it, right? And that question, is it genes or is it behaviors, kept rearing its ugly head to me throughout my life. And as I, continue to sort of just go ahead and do my work, I was in tech, doing really well, working in healthcare, life sciences, building up a great network of people who helped me out, and everybody's coming in to support me in my career. I said, I'm really not hitting the ball here. Why am I not addressing this issue? Why am I just like sort of watching it happen? So then I said, okay, I'm going to step aside. I'm going to find somebody who knows more about this. And that's where I met my co-founder, Dr. Danielle Dick. Thrive Genetics was born out of our partnership. It was her science, my tech background, and my vision of solving this problem. And we came together. She has 10 years and multi-millions of dollars of money invested in our technology, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And that essentially is identifying addiction risk in humans. So with our proprietary technology through genetics and behavioral analysis, we can identify someone's addiction risk, in my father's case, say before they go in to take their prescription medicines. So if you're going in for a high spinal pain surgery, you may not even know that you have an addiction propensity, but now you can with our software. It helps identify that for the physician to then treat you in a different manner. So if you're a high risk, they can articulate to you, okay, this is a concern, and this is how we want to treat you with medication, as opposed to just throwing oxy at you or fentanyl at you. Because spinal surgeries, you have to recover. You can't just take nothing. You can't just say, oh, I want Tylenol. It's so painful. Cancer, throat cancer, gastro, bone marrow. These are all high pain situations that if you don't take some form of pain medication, you can't recover, right? So it's not like, well, I don't want it. I broke my leg. You people who break their leg, they can say, I don't want it. I can take Tylenol. And you can. My mother just did. She's 83. She broke her leg. She recovered. She took Tylenol. No problems, right? But when you have cancer in the throat, bone marrow cancer, anal gastro, spinal surgeries, very, very high pain that needs repair. You do not have the luxury of time because your mortality rate goes up. You have to understand your addiction risk before you take these prescriptions. And today, it's a massive gap in the market. Doctors do not know. We're working with them now. They do not know. They have no visibility into this data point of if the person in front of them has an addiction risk propensity or not. And that's what our software does. It identifies that in patients before they're taking the narcotic. Obviously, there's a lot of other ways we can help the world with this. But this has been the biggest fruit on the tree that's presented itself to us in the hospital system. So that's where we're starting. So that's the history of the company. That's what we do, and that's where we're focusing now. But I'd love to, get your thoughts on it and deep dive a bit more.
Yeah, no, I think this is fascinating because we definitely talk about your risk towards addiction, and what I'd be curious about is because if you're a patient like from me. I happen to know through my family background that the risk is there. Why? Because we have alcoholics in the family. It goes through all throughout the family, not just for chemical addiction, but process addiction as well. Those things that you can become addicted to that you don't put the substance in your body. For example, gambling, gaming, sex, things like that. But you can see that in your family. And so maybe you can map that out and say, yeah, mom and dad were alcoholic, grandma and grandpa were too. So, clearly I have a genetic predisposition, but you may not have that luxury. Maybe you were adopted. Maybe you don't know what the family background was. Because after all, if you think about it, it seems like in this day and age, how many parents say, my child is my best friend and I tell them everything. And, I tell them about all my problems. That's an issue of itself, I guess. But, listen, years ago, different generations, people weren't necessarily sitting around talking to you about, grandma's gambling problem and granddad's drinking problem. So maybe it was never discussed. And so you're not aware of that. So how is it that this technology that you're using separates what you do out from just knowing what your family tree is and the genetic predisposition? How does that work?
Yeah, there's multiple answers to it. There's two paths I'll stick to. One is scientific clinical data presented from a physician to a patient is powerful. It's also so upfront. So let's say you didn't know. Let's say you're 27 years old. You have human papillomavirus, cancer of your throat. And you're an engineer, you're smart, you've never really tapped into drugs or alcohol. It's in your family, you're a high risk, you don't even know it. You go in to get the surgery and you come out, up to 20% of people come out of an opioid as an addict. So let's say you had some family history, but you never really did anything, behaviorally to show a problem. That's the person that specifically is isolated to not know and come out with an addiction. The person on the other hand might say, hey, I have it in my family. So I'll tell you, Mike, just like I told you earlier, my grandfather, gambler, my father, alcoholic. And then my mother's side of the family has had addiction pretty much in every one of my mother's sisters, right? That passed it down to my cousins that all have something. So my mother has nothing. I have nothing, right? My father had it. My mother's sister's children, my mother's, whatever, go down the list, right? Everyone's had some form of addiction. So just guessing, this is the main point, just guessing is Russian roulette. It is Russian roulette on both sides of the coin. Because let's say you went into a high pain procedure and said, everyone's addicted in my family to something. I don't want to take anything. Well, that's not good, because if you have a serious problem, you're going to deny the medication, which extends the surgery and creates a higher mortality risk for the patient, as opposed to saying, okay, let's take a specific data point test to really understand whether or not I have a predisposition or not. And that really tells me the truth of where and what I should be doing, because there's so many opportunities there to make the wrong decision. But what if you have data, you make the right decision? So that's for the person who doesn't know. Let's say for the person who's absolutely crystal clear they have a problem because they've been in and out of rehab for 20 years. They've gone to Karen, they've gone to every center possible. They've done everything they possibly can, and they're in rehab for the 14th time in their life. Pretty clear they have an addictive an addiction problem, right? But here's the data point that's super critical to know. For those who are in, say, recovery and in and out of recovery, treatment center for 10, 15 years. My father's best friend, I don't want to say his name, this is his problem, right? He went in and out. He would go in every time and say, hey, man, I got no problem. I'm good. That's nothing wrong. John, or that's not his name, but John, you've been in here 14 times. Clearly there's something that's not right. No, I'm fine. I'm going home. I'm good. Okay. Back for the 15th time. However, if you're able to test that patient that walks through the door, because you have to hit rock bottom to really realize you have to change. This is proven science. That person then gets a data point that says, John, I'm sorry to say, we studied your behaviors and your genes. It's scientifically proven that you are an addict. Now, that data point may sound so simple and so trite, but for that person who's been in there 14, 15 times, right? Putting their family through hell, putting the system through costs that are excessive. Obviously, there's billions of dollars spent on this a year. That data point should be a trigger point for that person to say, okay, maybe I really do have a problem. So there's value even to the person who clearly knows and has been in a situation. But it's really, like I said, it really is it's a bit of a Russian roulette guessing game, because it's sad to say this. Just like my family story I gave you, like, well, if the data is stacked in the favor of like your family has it, you should have it, then I would clearly be in recovery, right? And I don't have any issues, whether it's gambling or this or that, nothing. Why? I have no idea. My mom, she's a teetotaler. Okay. She's never even had an interest in it. Now, if we gave her an opioid tomorrow for her thigh when she broke her leg, she may have been addicted to the opioid. We don't know, right? But with our tests and what we're doing in our science, we would identify it, right? So the guessing game is really just that. Is it how is life really worth guessing, right? Is our family and our loved ones, is it really worth guessing and hoping that you don't have it, right? Or do you err on the side of, okay, everyone's going to have it because Frankie had it, Billy had it, Stacy had it, and John had it. Doesn't mean you're going to have it. So then all of a sudden you've changed, your approach to taking medications and maybe things that can extend your life to live a longer, more healthier life, thinking that you're, predisposed and you're actually not. So I think what's important to get into, and maybe we can touch upon it, is how we do it with genes and the behaviors, because it's very important to recognize that it's not just genes and it's not just behaviors. It's actually a scientific combination of both. I can nerd out on that a lot if you are interested as well on what it is behind the science.
Yeah, you know what? I find this fascinating because I will tell you, I just share with you sort of a segment of my own recovery journey. I was not one of those people that was one and done, meaning I didn't go to my first meeting and pick up a Desire chip and was done. We all know those people. I mean, those people exist, but frankly, there aren't that many. Most people relapse is part of their story. It doesn't have to be part of your story, but for many people it is. And that was certainly true of me. And what had happened in my particular case, and we'll see, we kind of weave this into the work that you're doing, is like many people, I would hear things like, listen, you're messing up. You made mistakes here. Or, if you worked out more, if you spent more time with your family, if, maybe if you went to church more, maybe if you went to the gym more, ran more, whatever. And it was always kind of like this behavior modification stuff, in the sense that it was, you're not doing this behavior, therefore you're drinking. And that never really made sense to me, because everything that I just mentioned, I was doing. I was working out. I do love my wife. I do love my kids. I was going to church. I was, all the things that was being suggested to me, that's what I was doing. And then finally, I went to, when I was in rehab, I happened to have there was one particular counselor that, interestingly enough, I didn't even like the guy, but he was a phenomenal instructor. But he started doing something that I had not heard in recovery up until that point. And what this guy did was he kept talking, he just kept beating into your head the disease of addiction, the disease of addiction.
Yes.
And one of the points that he made was, hey, look, if I asked all you guys and gals in here, do you have a disease? All of you would raise your hands. Yep, I've got the disease of addiction. It's in the DSM-5 and, got it. But the fact is you don't really believe it. I mean, you're mouthing it. You're saying it because you've been conditioned to say it, but I'm not really sure that you believe it. And then he would go through the scientific explanation as to why you drink the way that you do. And then he explained how, he went through the whole detailed process about how alcohol is processed differently in the body of an alcoholic than a non-alcoholic. And, we won't go through all those details right now. But the point was, that this is science behind it right now. You have the disease, you have this genetic predisposition, it's processed differently in your body, but here was the key takeaway. You're not changing that. You are not you're not changing your genetics. You can change how you respond and how your genetics sort of are displayed, I guess, and how they act out. He said, but you're not changing it. And so what you're going to have to do is just adapt to the fact that you have this. And the way that we do that in recovery is we don't drink. That's what we do. And so, but that was the first time I'd heard someone say, hey, look, this isn't your behavior. It's not because you're a bad guy, Mike. It's not because you're a bad person. This just is the way that it is. If you have cancer, there's things you do. You have diabetes, there's things that you do. If you have any other sort of, there's just things that you do. If you have an allergy, there's things that you do. And just adapt to that. And that, I know that's an oversimplified version of my story, but that was really the beginning of the change of my mindset and how I approach it. And I'm on this run of recovery for over 13 years. And it started with, it's not because I'm a bad guy. It's because I have all these other factors, and just adapt to those factors. And so that's why I'm really excited about the work that you're doing, because I will, even in the education groups now, I'll talk to the patients about this, and I'll explain genetics, and I'll, to the best of my ability, and I'll explain what I just explained to you. And still, I see the patients going, I hear you, that kind of makes sense, but I still messed up, and it's because I'm a bad guy. And it seems like the work you're doing is really pushing that envelope a little bit further and demonstrating to people, no, there is science behind this. And once you understand this, this will aid you in your recovery. I mean, do you buy into that explanation I just gave?
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful way to put it too, because there's two sides to the coin. It's like you understanding it is a disease, and like you said, you mouth it and you say it is, but to then look at the data and say, okay, I've been given this card, and then the other side of that coin is to say, okay, a lot of people have been given this card. I think I found a statistic, and don't quote me on this, I think it's correct. I never usually say that, but it sort of fits in the conversation. But over 50% of those of us walking around have the propensity for this addiction situation. I think it's between 50 and 65%. So only 10% are diagnosed. 1 in 5, 1 in 4 people are diagnosed as a substance use disorder situation. But when you think about the population walking around, many more people are just not a government statistic yet, right? And you say, okay, well, that's interesting. And then you say, okay, how do you blame yourself for this? Do you blame your environment? It is 50% genetic and 50% behavior. So for instance, if you were to, go through our process, you're going to get a genetic score, a behavioral score. It's combined, and it gives you a total addiction risk score. So somebody's genetics might be low, but their behaviors and their environment is very high. On a scale of 8 risk factors for behavior, we score it. And if you're scoring an 8 on behaviors and say a 2 on genetics, you're still a pretty risky situation, right? And vice versa, it could be the other way around, where genetics are high and behaviors are low. Somebody who doesn't even know, that's the sleeper, that's a problem. But I think the thing about understanding the disease from an emotional standpoint is to say, okay, I've got this data point. It allows me to know with information that it's not my fault. Yes, I've been given this card, but what are you going to do about it? Right. I think that's the challenge. And when you really think about it, it's okay. You might not even know you have this problem, right? And you say, okay, I'm going to, adjust my lifestyle in this way, or the other way around. If you do have if you're in a situation of recovery, it's okay. Now I understand from a data-driven perspective that this is not something that I created. Maybe it is something you augmented, but you didn't, fully create. How are you going to adjust, and what will you do with that data and that information? I think we haven't gone into the space of the second part, and we likely won't right now. We're just doing the identification in hospital systems for high pain medication avoidance and adherence. So that's more about empowering physicians to make better decisions. But there is an opportunity, to work with your counselors to create a better life plan. The data point itself should help people take a step forward emotionally and physically, because if you understand, okay, I've got this, I'm going to embrace it. Most people I've found in recovery, the ones I meet very often, like yourself, are wildly successful. I can't tell how many CEOs and wildly successful people I've met. And they'll say, this is how I manage my day. And I'm like, my gosh, it's like a military, it's like military precision, because they know in the back of their mind are like, okay, I have this situation of being in recovery, and I'm constantly working to be successful in that recovery process. And oh, by the way, I want to double down on that discipline and put it into my regular life, my financial life, my career. And all of a sudden they're making millions of dollars because they're taking the discipline of being in recovery, because every minute of every day is a gift and an achievement when you're in recovery, every minute. So congrats to you who are in recovery, because every minute of your day is an achievement. So you take that discipline of every minute of every day, add those up, and you say, wow, look what I've done with my recovery. And now I'm going to apply that discipline to my professional career, to my family life. And all of a sudden you're a high achiever. Well, maybe that's something as simple as a data point of pure clarity that allows you to get to that point in your life, right? So it's all obviously about being inspired. I'm inspired by those I talk to that tell me these stories. I'm like, wow, how did you, not only are you in recovery for this long, many years, but you're crushing the ball with your family and with your financial and career success, because you've taken that discipline and you've applied it. That's what's exciting to me, is that makes better families. And this is where I came from, right? This is my burning pain. My father, as much as I loved him, he never was in recovery. He never could get there. He passed away from it, right? And I always say that the greatest gift I could give back to this earth is helping somebody in his situation, because he created a lot of pain and trauma for my mother, for my brother, for myself, that I've passed down to my kids, I'm sure, in the way, I've tried to raise them, right? Well, they're doing really well. But the thing is, it's like you don't want to take that baggage and those emotional complexities generationally throughout 3-4 generations, because it lingers, and I can see it. I work at it myself every day, so I don't bring it into my family, right? But it's very pervasive. And that's the biggest gift I can give back, is how many people can we help that then impacts the families and then impacts generations. And that's where it gets beautiful. It gets really farther along beyond just the individual itself. So there's a lot of opportunity here for where we're playing.
Oh, wow. I get goosebumps just listening to what you're saying, because I can tell you in my life, that's exactly what had happened to me when you're talking about the discipline. And what it starts, like you just mentioned, it starts with the inspiration. Like I mentioned to you earlier on, I had that counselor that talked about the genetic predisposition, and it really, that was the light switch. I cannot tell you what a pivotal moment that was in my life, where it was like, oh, this isn't just a bad guy, because there's so much shame. There's so much disillusionment that happens when you're at that bottom. When you talked about how you have to go to that bottom, before you can get well, and that really, for most people, that's the case. Again, I'm painting a broad brush here. There are people that discover that there are other you don't have to go to the basement. There are actually other floors you can get off on. I mean, there are those people that understand that, but that wasn't me. That wasn't a lot of people that I know. And you get to that point, and where you're just so disillusioned at that point is you're like, look, I don't think I'm a bad guy, but society's telling me that I'm a bad guy because that's the stigma. That's how our society operates. There's just so much shame that happens. And then, somebody like yourself comes along and says, hey, wait, there's a lot more to the story than this. And if you embrace this, and if you understand what we're talking about, and then you develop that discipline, and that was important. And you just really hit on something I've not really thought about deeply over the years, but you're making me think about it right now. I often tell patients, because they ask me, hey, Mike, you had a decade or more of trying to get sober, and then all of a sudden you got sober and you're on this run of recovery. Like, what happened? What was the difference between that year and 5 years prior, 8 years prior? What was the difference? And, the answer to that was, A, I heard that counselor talk that I just mentioned, and B, the discipline that you imagine. I got to the point where I made a decision. That I'm going to get better no matter what. Why not? My life was on a downward trajectory, so I'm going to get better no matter what. I'm going to start listening to people that know what they're talking about. But, and this is the key point because you just mentioned it, is I decided and I call it, I went militant the first year. That first year. Now, the first year is the hardest because there's all the physiological changes that are, there's a lot of body chemistry that's changing. There's neural pathways that are changing. There's a lot, when you're drinking alcoholically, there's a lot of damage, and not just alcohol, but all the other drugs as well. There's a lot of damage that's done to your body and your brain, and that has to heal. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, but I just decided I'm just going to go militant. And that first year, when you talked about the discipline, I would do like 3 meetings a day. And I'm talking on work days. I would, on a work day, I would do 3 meetings a day. If I read something, it was recovery related. If I listened to something, a podcast or a tape, it was recovery related. Even movies. If I watched a movie or a show, it had a recovery message. You'd be surprised how many movies out there have recovery messages. But that's what I did for about that first year. And now I don't have to live that Spartan, today. It's much more balanced today. But that first year, when that physiological pull, because there's the mental pull, but there's also the physiology, like your body's screaming for alcohol. And I just had to really double down. But here's the benefit. The benefit was it brought structure back to my life. And it brought structure in a way that has carried on in all these years in recovery. And not just with recovery. I mean, I've done other things in my life that I can tell you, I've done some very hard things in my life since I've gotten sober that I can tell you right now that had I not gotten sober, the discipline and the structure to be able to do those things, and these things have nothing to do with recovery, but it brought sort of a structure to my life that allowed me to go ahead and accomplish other things, other really good things that help other people. And I can tell you that when I'm working now, my preference is to work with people that are in recovery because they've just developed a mindset like you just discussed, a mindset of service, a mindset of discipline, a mindset of following through on promises that they make to you, projects, completing the projects, because in recovery, you have to learn to live. You're only sober because you live that way. But that now it translates into families, it translates into the workplace, it translates into how you interact with the community. And like you said, it's a beautiful thing. So we take somebody that was really not contributing to society and sometimes harming society to now being some of the most productive people that you know. So you really touched a chord right there with me, if you can't tell.
Yeah, no, and I think on the other side of that, think about I'm not sure, maybe your listener base, there's somebody out there going, I'm really struggling. I can't get organized. I can't get this. I don't know what to do. Mike, you sound like you've turned the corner. That's great, but I'm stuck. And the thing that I learned from watching my dad, because that was him. He could not get it together and he died. Okay. So then how do you address that? And it's something I learned from Tony Robbins, I think, and it has nothing to do with my company, but it has everything to do with value, hopefully, to your audience. Figure out a way to create small steps for progress. Because when you create progress, you create a vision of tomorrow, you create hope. I know that's a big word, and it's an obvious word in recovery, but the word progress and living for progress is like when we say we're going on a vacation, we're looking forward to it, because the vacation itself is never as fun as what you're looking forward to. So that progress of each little minute step, whatever it is, doesn't matter what it is, even if it's inconsistent at first, creates that vision. And that vision then creates that wild outcome. And, whether you're a super high achiever or ever were or never was, it really doesn't matter, because it's up to you. At the end of the day, like you said, you hit rock bottom or you don't. My father, he looked right at me and I said, Dad, why are you doing this? And he never had any training. He never went to an AA meeting, nothing. He said, I just don't want to feel like this anymore. So what he did for about a year and a half is he had trouble sleeping. He would get up and he used to be Bob Ross. He would paint. And I still have all his paintings, even though they won't burn in the fire. Long story. But he painted. And that was his sort of like way of just fighting it. Like you said, that the first 9 months there where your body's still trying to, grab for something. He would paint. And for him, progress was getting up in the morning and actually just not having something and going to have a coffee. Like that was progress to him. Progress to him, the worst thing for him was at night. So when he used to go to the bar, he was the hang guy. He loved the 5 p.m. hang. Everyone rolls in, the roofers, the electricians, fishermen came in 3:30. They were ready to go home by 5:30. He would go to the bar 5:30 till 7:30 and go back at 9:30 till 2, right? That was his thing. And that progress for him was painting every night between 10 o'clock and 2 or 4 a.m. to fight off that feeling that he had. But that was progress. And again, he had no training, he had nothing. And it didn't even, in his case, eventually he relapsed for other reasons. But that point of like each incremental thing, whether it's just having a cup of coffee instead of going for something else, taking that walk, if you can, whatever it is. And I don't want to preach to the choir here. You know better than I, you're trained. But the point is progress. And I think when Tony Robbins said that, he wasn't talking about recovery, although maybe he was. He was speaking about it from a business perspective. Okay, so I'm going to bring this back home. That discipline you just mentioned from a business perspective that came from a recovery structure is literally the same thing. So when you look at the successful executive, everyone's working towards progress every day. Okay, how do we set the steps to get to progress? It's exactly the same cadence. It's no different. And the results are actually the same. There's a reward at the end of this thing. But enjoying each little step in that journey, whether it was painting at night and eventually going from painting from between 10 and 4 a.m. to actually going into your bed at like midnight and getting a normal night's sleep was progress for him. Because at some point, he would stop painting a little earlier every night. Instead of 4, it was 3. Instead of 3, it was 2. Instead of 2, it was 1. And eventually he's going to bed at 11, 12 o'clock at night and actually sleeping like a normal person. He felt like $1 million. The next day, I'd say, hey, you look great. He goes, I feel great. I slept, between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., right? And it was like, that was little progress over the course of a summer or maybe 9 months, is a little longer. But I'm sorry to really push this a bit far, but I really think if we look at it in just micro steps, and I know you teach this, those little steps of progress and listening to Tony Robbins are very valuable little nuggets that I want to leave, on the table today for you. I think it's just so critical, so super.
You are absolutely correct. It's just, we call it progress rather than perfection. We're always in our lives, right? We're always striving towards perfection. We will never reach it, but we're always trying. we're always trying to get there, but the end result is that we get better and better each day. And I love it because really what you just described with your father is the physiological part of it. Because one of the things when people come into recovery is sleep. Patients will say, well, I drink because it helps me sleep. Folks, I got news for it. It actually doesn't. It actually destroys your sleep. Now, because going unconscious after drinking and sleeping are not the same thing. But what happens is when you remove alcohol or drugs, one of the first things that happens is you have a hard time sleeping. That was true in my case too. And I remember in those early days, you'd be up all night. And I read somewhere, I don't remember where I read it, was like, hey, nobody's died from a lack of sleep. Don't worry about it. It will come back, like you just described with your father. Eventually, the serotonin levels start going up, GABA levels start going back up. Because again, you've destroyed your physiology. It will come back. And you'll be fine. But just finding those ways to occupy yourself and be constructive and distract your mind while that process takes hold. Because I think that's why a lot of people relapse, is because physiologically it's just difficult, and you get tired of, this is happening to my body, that's happening to well, it didn't happen to me when I was drinking, so I'll go back and do it. But to kind of circle back to the work that you guys are doing, I'm kind of curious as to, so how would this work? Let's say I come to you and I want to be a client of yours and I want to get involved in the work that you're doing. Like, what does that look like? So I contact you, assuming you guys contact me back, and kind of walk me through the process of what working with you and your company, what would that look like? What would it involve?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right now we're working strictly through hospital systems, but I'm curious if anybody in the audience wants to talk about a direct, communication for this service. Just send us an email at contact@thrivegenetics.ai. So it's contact@thrivegenetics.ai. And what I'll do is I'll approach it from a more one-to-one perspective, because what I'm about to tell you of how we work goes through a hospital system and a doctor, not direct. So we don't have a direct-to-consumer model. But we can, take some requests and see if there's any interest in it. But the model we have currently is really around surgical procedures. So we don't have it where you would just walk in and just say to your doctor, hey, I want this test. So for patients who come into, like I said, the certain oncology centers and certain spinal and neuro operational centers, they'll go to the doctor, they'll sit down, the physician says, okay, here's let's say, just use cancer as an example. You have a 3-month cancer treatment you're going to go into. It's a high pain head and neck cancer. It's going to be the type of cancer that you need to take some form of pain medication, whether that's oxy and fentanyl, which is 90+% probably common, and maybe 5-10% is Tylenol, if you choose to go the other route. And if a patient says they don't want the medication, they'll take Tylenol. What we've found is the complexity downstream for that 3-month procedure turns into a 6-month procedure. And if you're in a cancer situation, you do not want to test fate. You really want that procedure, if it's supposed to be 3 months, to be 3 months. But if you're writhing in pain, and throat cancer is awful, it's obvious you probably should be taking something. But if you have an addiction risk, what do you do? So the physician will sit with you and have a conversation about that. And if the patient says, I really don't want it, we provide the genetic and behavioral, test for that patient. And that patient then gets to understand scientifically their addiction risk. So it's a genetic test that's done through a spit into a tube. So the physician assistant nurse practitioner sits with the patient. They spit into the tube. It gets sent to the lab. Just like your blood work gets into a lab. That reading of the genetic profile is just like your entire genome. It's pretty, like I call it, vanilla ice cream of your genome. It sends everything. On the back end, our system reads that full genome, and based on my co-founder's science, it extracts the 4 to 5 clusters of genes that are related to addiction for your genetics. And in parallel, the patient's sitting with the nurse or the physician's assistant, and they do a behavioral 25-point question survey. It's kind of an if-then. If the patient says this, then it goes here. If they say that, it goes here. And it creates a profile based on your behaviors and your environment And that score is cataloged on the back end of the software. The software compares the genetic information with the behavioral information that then provides an addiction risk score. And that's all done through computer science on the back end of the system, where it brings it together. It's not really that complicated, but it brings it together into an addiction risk score that the physician has in a PDF in their inbox for that particular patient. Then the patient and the doctor sit down and say, okay, about a week later, 5 days later, this is what your addiction risk profile looks like. Now, for the cancer procedure, we do recommend, if you're high risk, we're going to recommend these alternative medicines. So the physician has nothing to do with us, but the physician would then take a more personalized medicine approach with that patient, typically, to help them in that situation. If they come in a low risk, and the patient says, oh, okay, interesting. I have a lot of addiction in my family. I came in low risk. That's very interesting. I'm not as scared to take the medication to have a more successful procedure. Obviously, it's life or death here. And the patient then can opt to have the physician provide the options for the medication. We don't tell the physician, give them this medication, give them that medication. We just say, look, here's the data point. You can fall into these categories, high risk or low risk. And this is what we provide to the physicians, a data point. And then on the back end, we have an app that's being rolled out now, or rolled out soon, that's going to help manage that patient through the cycle of that surgery. So if it's 3 months, the pain threshold that you're feeling based upon how much medication you're taking, it's going to tell the physician whether they need more medication or less. So it's going to work with the addiction risk score to then help them better understand the patient so they can adjust the medication if it's needed. So sometimes you might be a low risk patient and still, not be given that much, and you might need more because you have too much pain, right? Or if you're high risk, they might need to bring in a receptor inhibitor like these GLP-1s to soften the receptor so you don't have more urge based on your high risk addiction risk. So that's kind of the way it's working currently, and where we're in market or going into market. Where we're not in market is for the direct to consumer model, or if someone off the street wanted to just know, but it's something we're considering. So if there are a lot of people in your audience that listen to this and go, this is very interesting, I do have an alternative way to help people. It's through a research center that we could help you, actually. So let me know if that's interesting. Happy to talk to anybody.
I think that is interesting. I think it's fascinating. I think that this is something that I could see down the road, years down the road, this being something that's very, very common, because I tell you that I have been in recovery. I've had to have several surgeries, actually. I mean, that's just, welcome to being old, I guess, as I'm getting older. And one was due to a cycling accident, actually. But I can tell you that I was very, very concerned in the beginning. Actually, my first surgery was the bike accident. And long story short, I was involved in a pretty serious cycling accident and broke pretty much everything on the left side of my body. And I have steel plates up in my clavicle and all this kind of stuff. And then that led to some degeneration of a disc. And then later I had to have surgery on that. The reason why I'm saying this is, when I had to have that initial surgery, I'm probably about 6 years into recovery at that point. And I had not experienced that. I'd not, 6 years clean and sober, nothing going on. And then all of a sudden I'm in this situation where, okay, we're going to cut you open and we got to do some surgery. And it's like, oh my goodness, because I was very aware of the risk, because we're not living in the 18th and 19th century. It's not like they're going to cut you open and go, bite on the bullet, boy, get through it. I realized, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to take some heavy stuff here, for what they're about to do. And I was petrified of that. And, so what do you do? And I, like you had just described, somebody came in to me and described this to me, and they said, listen, we get that you're in recovery. Yeah, we know that you want to go zero medication, but it just isn't going to work that way. You're not going to heal like you had talked about earlier. And oh, by the way, if you refuse to take medication, then you're chances of relapsing on alcohol go up exponentially, and we don't want that. And so we went through this whole process of discussing the medications that were going to heavy medications that were going to be given to me, how it was going to be handled, how we were going to titrate down, the whole process, getting people involved. I didn't handle the medication, other people did, and it was used for pain, not to get high, but for pain. Now, having said all of that, I will still tell you that while I was in the hospital, because I was in the hospital for 4 days. Now, I took my recovery seriously, and I would tell every single person that came in, the nurse techs, I'm in recovery, the nurses, I'm in recovery, the doctors. And it finally got to the point to where I remember I told one nurse, hey, I'm in recovery, be careful with that stuff. And they're like, Mike, I think we all know, we think the valet down in the parking lot knows you're in recovery. We got it. But even though I did everything I could and I made it known, because you do have to advocate for yourself, guess what? They were still handing me OxyContin like it was Skittles. They were like, "Do you sure you don't want more? Can we give you more?" They were still doing that. But I think what you're talking about will help not only the patient, but the medical staff to understand what's going on here. It seems to me like this is something that you can use to assist, or can be of assistance when you're in that situation with the medical staff and your physician. Hey, here's what's going on here, and this needs to be part of my plan. This needs to be part of this whole process in recovery, because I really do have this. Isn't just Mike being obsessive compulsive. It's a real thing, and you guys need to pay attention to this. But it seemed to me that the medical staff they were listening to me, but they weren't quite grasping the magnitude of this. Does that make sense?
It does. My wife's a nurse, and it's very interesting how they're wired. So the other day I was talking to somebody, telling them exactly a story, just like you said, exactly. And the guy said, well, it sounds like you're just pushing drugs for the drug company. That was his kind of like side remark. And she snapped at him, and she was like, people need to take X to heal properly, because they're in their mind, and it's like programmed. They are 110% focused on you healing. Like, even like my wife has zero money interest. She works as a nurse. She could, if they gave her $50 a day, she'd be like, great, I love it. And I'm like, honey, we got to pay the bills. Doesn't matter. She is so into the healing thing. It's like she's a healer. Okay, beautiful. God brought this beautiful person. She wants to be a healer. But they're so taught to just heal. If you're broken, heal. And how do we get you to heal, right? And it's not like it's not an open-minded thing. So I think that's where the data comes in to say, this is important that you heal, but it's important that we listen to the person who's, saying they have a problem. Like you had mentioned, I'm coming in recovery. So then here's where the opportunity lies in your situation. I have more questions for you about that, but there's a really interesting opportunity coming up right now in science, where there are drugs that soften the receptor, that is the receptor that is related to, and I want to say this effectively, related to your cravings. Okay. And that's called the GLP-1s. It's called whatever brand. I don't want to name a brand because we're on a recorded line here. There are brands that make these products, the GLP-1. It's used in weight loss right now to subdue cravings. Okay. This product line is GLP-1 is the name of it. There's ones in the market. You'll know the names. This product has been shown to be used in addiction to reduce cravings. What if it was used in medicine in situations like yours? Because it's not going to create an addiction issue. It's for something else, right? It's allowing you to have more, and the doctor to have more confidence that maybe instead of the 5 or 10 pills they gave you, maybe they just give you 1 or 2, right? Because essentially this is softening the receptor for your cravings. Or maybe they need to give you 5, but it softens the receptor. But it still does the same effective job that it's supposed to do to create the the pain relief, if you will, so you can heal properly. So essentially, your receptor gene that's around cravings is softened. And I think this is something they're looking into now, that really is interesting as well for us to partner with, because if we can find a way to heal the patient, but still, understand that addiction risk up front, we're then solving both problems. It's not either or. It's not like, okay, you can't heal if you're in recovery. And it's not, the double negative situation. It's actually maybe a net positive twice, where you're actually able to heal somebody faster and still give them less medication, at least pain medication. And this creates a more successful outcome at a lower risk for relapse or addiction in itself. So this is something that's, I think, on the bleeding edge. You were talking about cutting edge. I think this is on the next edge, where there's a possibility to be able to use these products for cravings. They're using it in cravings in addiction treatment. Okay. So like you said, somebody comes in, they've been in 15 times, use the GLP-1 to, I think it's some clinical trials we're doing now, to soften the addiction propensity. But it could be used in this scenario equally. And I guess that's my point.
Yeah.
But anyway,
listen, I will tell you that that has not been used yet. The GLP-1s have not been used at where I work, but there's discussion.
Yes.
Some of the doctors in the area in which I work have actually talked about that. And interestingly enough, they were asking me my opinions on this, because it's out there. I mean, people are talking about it because they're like, okay, can we use these medications for off-brand, because it's an interesting concept. Now, everybody has to understand that there's some positives to this, but there could be some negatives to this as well. And I think that's where their concern is like, okay, if we do this, then what are the negative side effects? But I do know this. It just kind of sort of my, shooting from the hip sort of reaction to it initially is that I know that if you are drinking alcoholically, if you are certainly fentanyl and xylazine, which if you're not familiar with xylazine, the street name is Trank. Look that up on the internet. If you're not familiar with that, it is so horrific and so deadly that I think that there's a certain point, some of the patients I work with, we really are at a point with some of them, it's by any means necessary, my friend, by any means necessary, you need to stop doing what you're doing, because you're going to die, particularly when you get into the much stronger opiates, street opiates and things like that. And so if the GLP-1s help, I say do it, because then it's just a risk assessment of, okay, are there negative side effects to GLP-1? Sure. But there's probably a lot more negative side effects, to include death with fentanyl. So let's do this, and let's get you started down the road. Because kind of the way I look at it is when you get into medically assisted treatment, which is not necessarily the focus of this podcast, but early on, medically assisted treatment is very helpful. I mean, it was true in my case. Now, should you be using these drugs for the rest of your life? No. Because I don't. Right. I mean, that first year, there were things that assisted me to get through that physiological change that I needed to go through, and then I weaned off of those, and I'm not taking anything now. So I know that's a concern. Is when you get on, particularly people that are using it for weight loss, is you get on it, very effective for weight loss. But then am I taking this the rest of my life? So those are things that we would have to explore more. But I'm with you, and I am fascinated by the potential of the GLP-1s is used for recovery.
Be curious to maybe explore that with you offline. I did have a question about your medical situation. Did you at any point, when they were giving you these pain medications, did you have the feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm getting pulled back? Did you ever feel like that, or was it totally like, no, I'm good?
Oh, it's a good question, because actually it was quite the opposite with me, and I really didn't like it, and I'll tell you why. I was fortunate in that I was about 6 years ish when this happened, And by then, my body had become clean enough. And just to throw in a little more background, I mean, I'd really gotten back into physical fitness. I was running a lot. I was doing triathlons. I was doing a lot of cycling, which is what led to my accident. Actually, it was that was so here we are in this situation as a result of me trying to help myself. But at any rate, because I was doing that, I was really trying to eat properly, exercise, doing a lot of aerobic type stuff, and my body was clean. I mean, my system was clean. And so here we are now, the accident happens and I'm on these medications and it's polluting my system again. And I really did not. So I'd had a taste of what a clean system was like. And now I'm dumping this stuff into my system, which was necessary for what I was going through. But man, I didn't like it. I felt slow. I felt fog. I was in a fog. Opiates actually do a lot of things. It just stops your system up, causes constipation. It's like everything in your body just sort of shuts down. And I didn't like that. And I of course, I know the effects of alcohol. And I realized that, like, okay, I'm clean. I'm operating on all cylinders here. And now I'm operating on like 2 cylinders. But alcohol has the same effect. It just slows you down and you're not able to focus. And it's just like you go into slow motion. It's almost like you can run on the road. You can go running on a road, but then you got to jump on the beach and run in the sand for a while. And that's what it felt like. I was running on the road and now I'm running in the sand. And I was like, I don't like this. So that was the nice thing. Now and I've heard other patients talk about, hey, Mike, I just had surgery. I'm in recovery and I didn't like it. I was worried about opiates, but I think that these drugs affect people differently. Okay. Because I've had other people, I mean, I can't tell you how many patients that we've had that had years of sobriety and then they get injured, they're in a car accident or something, and then they're given these opiates and it's the exact opposite and they're off to the races again after that. So, but it is something that you can't predict, really. I mean, we can't just as an individual predict how our bodies are going to react, but I think that the tools you're talking about will help in that. And then having that plan, that's the thing. If you know you're going to go into surgery and you're in recovery, you got to have a plan. And that's the one thing I did do right, was I had the plan going in. But I think that what you're doing will help with that plan.
Yeah. So I always say if 1 in 5 have a substance use disorder, the other, let's say, or let's keep the math simple. If 10% of the population has an SUD, the other 90% doesn't know. Really, you don't know. People are just running around guessing. That's where I think there's a bigger opportunity to really understand. I always say there's 3 stages of addiction, right? It's like people have no clue. People who have some sort of sense of it, like, oh, something's not right here, or maybe I'm, in my 30s and I'm doing a little too much this or that. And then there's people who are in recovery, right? So it's not equally distributed. In fact, that middle group is very large. That's 50 to 65%. But if you think about those 3 groups, we're kind of leaning in on the early unsure of group is really where we're trying to enter the market, if you will, where some of those folks in the latter stages in full on recovery, it's just a data point for various reasons. One could be for the physician to treat you in a more effective way. The second could be simply just for your own precaution, right? To know, okay, look, I'm telling you, I had this, you have it documented. I want you to be careful, and how we manage this. And then I think downstream too, you had mentioned some other issues that come from it. So the question is like, if they were to give you let's say you weren't in recovery, Mike, let's say they were to give you the full bore, whatever that means, right? Or 5 pills instead of 1. Would these other things that popped up or cropped up along the way after have happened if they were able to treat you more directly, more, on point in that smaller span of time? Did these other complications occur from the length, because you couldn't maybe take the full prescription or whatever they normally would do? And there's so many nuances to that sort of scenario you're in to maybe answer that, but it's something to consider and to think about too from from a point of view of, where you were. It's interesting. It's such an interesting story that you went through that. I didn't know that about you. And it's like very, very relevant, to what we're doing. Yeah.
It's fascinating work. And so tell the listeners how they can learn more about what you and your colleagues do.
Well, right now we're doing there's a lot of press articles that have come out and some videos and different things. So you probably just Google Thrive Genetics, the company. But the website's thrivegenetics.ai. It's a thrivegenetics.ai is the website. You can reach us directly at contact@thrivegenetics.ai. And I'm on LinkedIn if anybody's interested from a business point of view. We're trying to do some partnerships in the pharmaceutical space, trying to better understand how that could be complementary to helping others. And we're also partnering with a lot of groups in hospital systems right now for integrated healthcare systems. So all the integrated providers, if there's anybody that's connected to or working with, we'd love to connect with the folks there. James Piacentino on LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to hit me directly, or that contact at thrivegenetics.ai is valuable.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, please do reach out to James because this is so fascinating. I really like it. You guys are really pushing the edges of this. And so I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Mike. My pleasure. Happy to do it anytime.
Yeah, and let's do it. You guys, check him out. Check out this company, Thrive Genetics, because this is fascinating work. It really is. And we're going to be pushing the edge because, that's what we do here on this show is try to find out ways to help all of you get sober, get well, because as James mentioned, it's not just for you, it's for your families, it's for the community. The whole world's just a better place. We all benefit when we get sober. And so guys, thanks again for joining me on Recovery is Possible, Hope and Healing with Mike and Lily. And we will be talking to all of you again soon. So you take care of yourselves and God bless. So as I always like to say, I do not represent any group, do not represent anyone other than myself. My only purpose in giving this information is to share with you what I've done because it's helped me and maybe it will help you too. If I've said something that does not apply to you or you don't agree with, then just discard it. But try to take any information that you can use for yourself and help others as well. That's what we do in recovery. We help ourselves along the way, and we hope to impart the knowledge we have gained to others as well. With that, please visit our Facebook page, Recovery is Possible, and our website, VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com. Let us know how we're doing, and let us know if there's any topic that you're interested in hearing about. We'd love to hear from you, and take care, and we'll see you next time.